Joining me on the More Than Your Age podcast is saxophonist, composer, visual artist, and co-founder of Brave Musician, Monica Shriver. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Erica. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. I've been looking forward to our conversation. It's kind of funny because I saw how we got connected. I saw you wrote a response. I can't remember if it was a Facebook or an Instagram response, but it had something to do with age, and you shared like a little brief bio about your life, and I was like, wait a second, she needs to be on the podcast.
It was the holistic psychologist on Instagram. And yeah, she made a post about like rethinking about age and like 30 or 40 not being too late. And I don't normally post on things like that. And I kind of freaked out a little bit because I saw how many people liked that post. And I was like, oh no. But I was so compelled because it has been something that's so important to me, especially as I've been talking to people in my profession that are younger than me, that like, it's not too late. And and I really want to be an example and share with people that it really isn't too late. Like, I'm proof.
I know, and I love it. Your story is a great example of not giving up on your dreams and pursuing your passion at any age. So like right now, you are living your dream as a musician, composer, and performer who, you started professionally a few years ago, but before you had experience as a college professor and teacher, you taught for 20 years. What, as a musician too, but why did you initially decided to pursue the career path of teaching?
So if we go back, so I'm 46 now. So if we go all the way back to graduating from undergrad, right? We're in the early 2000s. And I had never intended to be a teacher, despite many of my friends saying that I should, many of my teachers saying, and in the 90s, the teaching was definitely something that people said you should fall back on. I think nowadays people realize that people should want to be a teacher to be a teacher. I'm a firm believer of that. But that was not the advice that I was given. But I went all the way through my undergrad and got a degree that fully made me incapable of teaching. So I did not have an education degree, but I found myself needing work. And so I started substitute teaching. And it seemed like the perfect job because I could say yes or no on any particular day, and I could kind of just build around. And I ended up getting a substitute teaching job at an arts charter school in Phoenix where I lived, and they had band from 1 to 3 in the afternoon, which was great. I didn't have to sub all day long. I just had to come in and sub for 2 hours. And they ended up needing me for a long-term sub position. So I ended up teaching for a whole entire quarter. And then they asked me if I would join the team. And so that is kind of how I ended up a teacher, fully not intending to be a teacher, but because it was a charter school, I didn't have to have a degree.
Interesting. Okay. So then you get sucked in this education world and you continue for 20 years.
20 years.
Yeah, that's a long time. And so no, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's a long time to be doing something that you don't love to do.
It is a long time to do something you don't love to do. Absolutely. Well, while you were still teaching and not loving it, what opportunities did you have to play your music and to compose and to kind of fulfill that artistic side of you?
I would say that I transferred my artistic passions to my students. And I think that is where both the excitement that kept me teaching, but also the frustration with me not getting to do the thing that I loved to do. But I had some wonderful students that were curious and wanted to do more and were really eager to learn. And so I think that's where most of my energy went. I did play some gigs, but most of them were honestly just to make money. They weren't really fulfilling any sort of artistic calling, really. So that took a number of years for me to kind of figure out. And when I look back on it now, I realized that I was definitely in survival mode. I was trying to just make it from one day to another, and it wasn't a place for me that I could make art from.
Now, there's a saying, love it or hate it, that those who can't do, teach. I hate that saying.
I do too.
I was going to ask you, as a performer yourself and a teacher too, what are your thoughts on this statement?
I think that performing and teaching are two different skills. And so I think sometimes people conflate the inability to perform with the ability to teach, which isn't necessarily true, and vice versa. I think there are people who are absolutely amazing teachers who we need in the classroom, who that is their calling. That is the thing that they love to do. The desire to perform and to be a performer doesn't make them happy. And that doesn't make them any less of a musician. It's just the path that they chose. And I think we also do a disservice to people who have this artistic desire, not cultivating it. And so I think what I wish I had more of was like, why do you want to be an artist? I wanted to be an artist from when I was a little kid. And I use artist in like the very broad, overarching music arts kind of term. But it was beat out of me as I got older and older and older. And then it wasn't until probably about 5 years ago, maybe when I started my master's, so maybe about 10 years ago, where somebody was like, I think you've got something to say, Monica. maybe say it. But yeah, that kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent. But I do think there are people that can perform and teach or do one or the other. And I think we just need to celebrate all of it.
So you had said, and I'm forgetting exactly the words that you said, but the joy to perform, create, whatever, was like kind of taken from you. Do you remember the exact phrasing that you said?
I think I might have said beaten out of me.
Yeah, okay. That's what I thought you said, and I was like, I think that's what she said. Okay, so that it was beaten out of you. What do you what do you mean by that? And yeah, you could just go with that. What do you mean by that specifically?
So there's a bigger culture that is prevalent in every place that you live, and without going into too much negative detail, I just wasn't in the best place for me to be nurtured. And I spent a lot of time thinking that was my fault, that there was something wrong with me, and trying to fix that, trying to be like everyone else, trying to fit into the mold of everything that seemed to work for everyone around me, but that was not working for me. And I think after a while, I got discouraged. I thought, well, this wasn't meant for me. I'm never going to be as successful as my other friends. They seem so happy. What's wrong with me? There was a lot of just misunderstanding of my own passion in life. And when I got out of that situation, and the pandemic helped a lot, because talk about a big pause to think, I got to really figure out, like, what do I really want out of my life? How do I want to live? And that was just something I had not had the time or energy to figure out. People, especially in music, kind of have this like, well, you've got to do this in order to do this. And whether it's certain types of gigs or playing certain types of music or going into certain fields, there's always a path that somebody thinks that you should do. But there's only the path that you want to do. Yeah. And I was in a place of scarcity and competition, and I have learned about myself that does not do me well. I need a very nurturing and loving environment to succeed. And some people thrive on competition, and I'm not one of them. I shut down. And I've learned that about myself. And so that's a really powerful thing to know.
Absolutely. Now, when you were teaching and you would work with students who, some probably did thrive in competition, some probably thrived more with nurturing, did you feel like you were able to navigate both of those worlds as a teacher, or was one a little easier because that's how you were than the other?
I really struggled as a teacher to start out with, and I made a lot of mistakes. And I look back and I think, wow, and part of it was that I really thrived in the education system because I was one of those students that like just did what I was told, and I got A's. And to me, that was success. And I realize now that how inaccurate that really is. And so I think I projected a lot of that onto my students and a lot of that expectation. And of course I was doing the best I could, but I think it took me quite a bit of time to get to the point where I was a more nurturing and understanding teacher. And I did eventually get there. But a lot of it was I was thrown into a system that some of my students didn't thrive in. And there was no room to I was thrown into a system I didn't thrive in, really. It was the perception of thriving. Because we sort of think, well, if somebody's getting all A's, then they understand, or they're successful, or, we don't have to worry about them. So I hope that at least some of my students at least got enough to kind of find their own way. I really, really do hope that. And some of them I've had the privilege of being able to play with them, like as professionals. And that has been just amazing to just go back and be like, all right, we're just jamming together. We're just doing a gig together. And this is so fun.
Yeah, that's really cool that you get to experience that too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's really special.
Kind of on with what you've already touched is that, you didn't feel like you thrived so much in the education world. You were teaching and you were still making a difference in children's lives, whether, you fully see it or not. But you still never felt at home. Could you explain just a little bit more of what that means to you and why you felt that way, or you didn't feel at home?
Yeah, I think I just never really felt like I was in the right space for me to be who I wanted to be. I think I was also in survival mode. So I think part of it was like, I've got to make money. I've got to feel secure. I've got to do something that society deems important, which for especially women in the arts, like spending your time playing music is not super valued. I found many of my male friends, that is never questioned. But for me, it was always like, well, why aren't you taking care of somebody? Why aren't you spending more time on someone else? And so I was always pressured to spend time on other people as opposed to spending time on myself. And I think my childhood Monica knew she didn't want to be a teacher, and I talked her out of it. And I think that's probably the part that never felt like at home. Like, even when I was good at it, even when my students had success, even when I felt like, all right, I've got a paycheck, I'm doing good. There's still that little part of you that's like, this isn't the right place for you. That little voice. And sometimes it's quieter than others, and sometimes it kind of just hits you over the head so that you listen, which is kind of what happened to me.
Well, yeah, and before you were like fully hit over the head, at 35, you decided to pursue your master's. Why did you feel like you waited a long time, or why did you wait until then, or what was it about at that point that you decided to pursue that degree?
This is so ironic when talking about it from this perspective, but I like literally doubled down on the teaching thing. So at that point, at 35, I had gotten a college teaching job, teaching saxophone lessons, and was no longer teaching at the Arts Charter School. And I was at the community college and teaching, and they needed substitute teachers to do the music history classes. But as it turns out, you have to have a master's degree to teach those classes and thus sub those classes. So here, my friends are teaching jazz history, and I know way more about jazz history than your average person. I could come in and sub quite easily, but I couldn't. So I went to my boss and I said, so if I go back and get my master's, is there a chance that I could teach some of these classes? And he said yes. And so then I went and got my master's in jazz education. So now I have the ed degree and got the college teaching classes. And so 2 weeks later, after I finished my degree, there I was teaching music history classes. And so it was funny because it was like, I went back to school to keep teaching. And I think I thought, okay, college is different, which it is in some cases, but it also is not. As anybody who has been an adjunct professor anywhere, it has its challenges, and you are generally overworked and underpaid, and it's I just doubled down.
And so you were still teaching, which, based on what you've already said, like, I'm sure there was still this pull of like, okay, is this what it is? I still don't feel like I'm at home. And then the pandemic happens and just life goes crazy for everybody. And you decide, what you told me is you had this midlife crisis and you decide to pack up and move to Nashville.
Yes.
So why now? What happened? Like, what finally happened, and then why during the pandemic?
Well, so it actually, the start of it happened a couple of years prior. And this is one of those, like, I think everybody kind of has these moments in life where you just sort of like, something just clicks. And so for me, it was November of 2018. And I was teaching a jazz history class. It was one of my Wednesday night classes. And I had been teaching this class for years at this point, over and over again. And we got to the video where we were talking about John Coltrane's life, who is a very famous jazz saxophonist. And I've always watched this video. It has never fazed me. But this particular day, we get to the point where they talk about him passing away at 41. And that was the month I turned 41. And something just snapped. And I was like, oh my God. And it wasn't that like I was going to be Coltrane, but it was like looking at everything that he had done and his life had ended. And I was at that point. And I was like, what have I done? What have I done that I really want to do? And it's so funny because I was like sitting there in the front of the class. I'm like, don't cry. Don't cry. Like, my students don't have a clue what's going on in my head, right? They're just like, staring at this video. And I'm literally like, my brain is on overload and I can barely keep it together. And that was the moment where I was like, okay, I've got to make a decision. And I wasn't sick. Like, there was nothing like at that point. It was just this realization that I was at a crossroads, that I was at a point where either I was going to do this thing or I was going to give up. And I felt like I was too young to give up. But I was too old to keep waiting. And so it was like, that was the moment where I was like, I've got to do something. So I started just thinking about like, where could I go? And at the time I had 2 cats to worry about, and that was it. So I was like, I can go anywhere in the country. I can go anywhere in the world. Where do I want to go? And so my sister had suggested, she's like, well, why don't you just, see where you know people? So I pulled out, Google Maps, and I started just putting pins in cities where I knew people. And I was like, well, let's just, I had gone to a lot of conferences. I'd met a lot of musicians. And so I just started just putting pins in cities. And at some point, maybe about 50 or 60 people that I'd thought of, I just zoomed out. And it was like, if you kind of put the Rockies as being the center, there's, like 7 or 8 pins to the west. And then there's like all of these pins over on the east side of the country. And I was like, well, that's interesting. I'm like, well, what's in the middle of all of that? Turns out it's Louisville, Kentucky. And I was like, oh, nope, not going to live in Louisville. So what's close by? And that's kind of why Nashville. It's a great city location-wise in the country. It's easy to get to lots of places. it has a very, very strong music scene that has all styles of music. A lot of people think Nashville, they think country, but there's a huge, huge scene here of all kinds of music. And so that's where I was like, well, that's where I'm going to start. And it took a little bit of time to kind of figure out like when to make that happen. But so the crisis was November of 2018, spent most of 2019 figuring out where I wanted to go and logistics and all of that. And then made the formal announcement in January of 2020 that I was leaving. Yeah. And so I had gotten permission from my boss to move one of my classes online. So I still had kind of my college teaching gig to kind of keep me going. And I told the world, I'm like, I'm moving to Nashville. And everybody's like, what the hell? They're like, what? Wait, we don't understand. Like, you just bought a house a few years ago. You have this college teaching job. You seem so happy. Like, what are you doing? And I just was like, I need a change. Like, I just need a big change. And still to this day, I couldn't tell you why. It was just this feeling. It was like, this is where you need to go. And so I just trusted it.
I think it's really cool how you just even thought of like, okay, I'm just going to pin places in the States and see who do I know, where they are. And then, there were more on the east side, and then it was just, okay, let's do Nashville. There's, that's a big music scene. And I do like how you said that it's not just country, because people do, they just think, oh, country, so she must be a country singer. Nope. Nope.
Right? Not a singer, not country. Yeah.
So you made this decision, and thankfully you had this job that you were able to teach online, which was great that you were able to do that. Did you have additional fears, or what fears did you have regarding stepping in, moving to a place you don't, you may know a few people, but your family or whoever, your close-knit people aren't there yet, and then you have this one job, but there's not an additional guaranteed income. So what kind of fears did you have, and how did you get through all of that?
Well, it's really ironic now because I thought I had everything set up, right? So I had this college class that was going to move online, and we had they were excited to keep that. There was a music store in Phoenix that was going to open up a store in Nashville that year, and she's like, "Yeah, you can come teach lessons at my store. It'll be really great." And I had a band director friend who was living here at the time that was like, oh, yeah, I'll get you in with the schools. We'll get you doing clinics and all of this stuff. And then I had my friends that were professionals that lived here. And so I felt like I should be okay. I should be okay. That was January of 2020. And as we all know, just shortly thereafter, everything changed. And so in May of 2020, I had finished up the semester, which had started in person and ended online. And I was just sitting there like, do I still move? Like, do I continue with this plan, or do I wait out this pandemic? But by that point, I was so done with living in Phoenix that I just was like, I have to get out of here. I have to leave. And so I packed up my truck the end of May of 2020 and drove across the country by myself and 2 cats, never stopped. Like, I think I stopped for like an hour and a half to take a nap somewhere in like Oklahoma or something.
Long drive.
It's a very long drive. And pulling a trailer, it was even longer than it normally would be. And nothing that I had planned worked out, minus the keeping the college classes online. Because what happened was then with the pandemic and me having moved that one semester in person online, my school kept me for the next couple of years teaching the same classes online, which saved me, because it was really, really appreciated that I could kind of keep that income and keep that going. But it was also really hard because everybody was struggling during that time, and it was so lonely because I didn't know anyone, and everybody I did know was isolating. And so I spent the next year and a half in my apartment, and it was rough. It was really, really, really rough. Probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to go through. But yeah, I knew I was in the right place.
I bet that was, just even thinking about you had planned and you made all these decisions to move, which was technically pre-pandemic. It was a pre-pandemic decision to do that. And then the pandemic happens and it's like, no, I'm going to still go and I'm going to do this. It felt right. But yet, like you said, you couldn't be around anyone. So you're in this apartment and, you know, so many people dealt with so much pain and so much heartache. But I would imagine that it was so challenging. Were you able to use that to write music, to compose music, or like how did you, even though it was so hard, how were you able to just get by day to day?
I didn't. I fell into, I would love to be one of those artists that like used it to create art. I didn't. I fell into a deep depression and I went into survival mode and I almost quit. I mean, there were weeks that I never played my instrument. There were times when I struggled just to get out of bed. And I eventually figured out that walking really helped my mental health. And so I started walking like around my neighborhood. And Tennessee is like a beautiful state if you've coming from Arizona. So there's like trees and rivers and lakes. And so I spent a lot of time walking, which was really, really helpful and kind of a safe way to be around people. But it really made me question whether or not I wanted to be an artist at all. It really, really did. And I think that's an important thing to talk about because, you know, some people, and I think it has partially to do with the fact that I had moved and it was like my entire support network was gone. And, you know, they say that like moving is a big life change, but, you know, so was a pandemic. I went through a breakup at the same time. Within 2.5 years, you know, 2 years later, I had lost the college teaching job ended. My cat died. It was like all of the things sort of happened all at once. And within 2.5 years of moving to Nashville, my entire life was different. Not a single thing that I had brought in 2020 was the same. And that was wild. It was just like, when is this going to stop? And it didn't stop until like everything had changed.
Wow. That's a lot. I mean, that is a lot to deal with. Like you said, just a move and then a loss of a relationship and then your pet and this just whole new life and then being stuck. Like I just can't, you know, it's tough. And then, you know, we move forward and then at some point you're able to start performing. And so how did that happen? When did that happen? And how did you know where to perform? And like, how did that unfold?
Yeah. Well, and actually it went to making my first record first. And that was the piece was like, as the pandemic started to lift a little bit, I started going out and meeting people. I started meeting some really, really great musicians. And I had a good friend here who introduced me to people. And I started sort of thinking like, okay, I have now made the decision that I still want to be a musician. Right? Major life. And the pandemic, it was one of those where it's like, I could do anything. Like I've got a master's degree. I spent 20 years teaching, which means I've done a bunch of things that don't include teaching. Like I could do anything, right? Like give me a job as an accountant. No. But so it was great because I was like, I chose to be a musician. I chose that. And so I decided that I wanted to make this album. I wanted to make my first album. And this had been in the back of my head to make an album for a while, but I didn't have all of the tools. And so part of the pandemic, after I kind of got to the point where I could sort of accept what I wanted to do next, I started just working on my art and I started working on how this first album was going to look. And so the first recording session was December of 2022. And it was so exciting to be in the studio. I called the musicians that I really wanted to work with, and I'd saved all of my money so that I could pay them what they wanted. And we ended up making this record. And that is where I think a lot of the pain and a lot of the frustration and a lot of the things that I went through in the pandemic kind of came out in this record. I recorded a cover of Ornette Coleman's Lonely Woman. And so for me, like that was like the culmination of the entire pandemic, because that's what I was. I was just this lonely woman.
I think, you had also said that like during the pandemic, you wish that you would have been able to like compose and create music and like during the midst of all of that, but you couldn't. But then what you just said is that when you recorded this album, you were able to like release and put all of those emotions into that album and like in that specific song that you said. And I think that that's, I'm glad that you didn't give up on your dream, because I don't, you wouldn't be happy, and so I think that's a beautiful part of the story too, of like there was all this pain and hurt and this darkness, and then you still were pursuing this album and you were just able to release it all out. And I've listened to some of your songs and I love them. I'm like, ooh, there's good music. And so you finally released your first album, Acceptance, in July 2023. I'd love to hear a little more about the purpose and meaning behind this album. I know you just shared a little bit, and then what can people expect when they listen to it?
So thank you so much for saying that. That's so kind of you. I really appreciate it. I think so. I had wanted to put out an album, but I also really wanted to put out, I guess the way it worked for me was like I didn't actually put out an album. I actually just intended to record some of my music, and what it was going to get used for, I didn't know until it all got recorded, and then we're listening to it and I'm like, I think this is an album. And so it's funny because I did it in 2 recording sessions, because I went back into the studio in April of 2023. And I recorded 9 songs within those 2 sessions. And then 5 of them made the album there is a bonus track on the physical CD. So 6 technically. But the other 3 are like gone. Like one of them got re-recorded. It'll got updated and re-recorded. And then 2 of them are just never to be heard from again. They were just to be learned. They were just part of a process, and they may be revisited at some point, but I think that's one of the things with growth and songs, is that sometimes you just kind of got to go through things and learn from them. But really, there were 2 things that I wanted to do when I recorded, and one of them was to have high quality recordings to try and get work. And that was one of the things that had shifted significantly with moving from one new city to another. In Nashville, people want proof that you do the thing that they're hiring you to do. So people don't ask for business cards, they ask for your Spotify. Like and business cards, I realize I'm old, like not that people don't have business cards anymore, but I still do. But it was one of those where I didn't have any documented footage of what I could do. I didn't have any recordings. I had a little bit of things from stuff I'd done in Phoenix, but Phoenix wasn't one of those cities that recorded things. And that was the culture shock for me, was going from living in a place where you could do an entire show and people would and nobody would record it ever, to going in Nashville where 7 people have posted it on social media before you even gotten home. And tagged you in it, and because they're all trying to help each other and support each other, and let people know what's happening. And I'll never forget the very first time I played in Nashville after the pandemic. Hadn't been around people for a year and a half. My friend Ryan said, come on out to my gig, we'll play blues. And I was terrified. My body didn't know what to do. All I can remember about that was that my whole body was shaking. And I don't even know how I played the saxophone. And I got done and I was like, oh, well, thank God I survived. I'm okay. I did the thing. I was so terrified. And I was like, all right. And then I was like, well, at least I just, made it through. And I got home and I'm checking my social media and people have posted it. And I was like, oh my God. I was mortified because it felt like the worst thing I'd ever done. And now it was out in the world. And what I've realized now is just like, it happens so much content is out there, especially when it comes to music. And I came from such a perfectionist background. Part of that was how I was raised. Part of it is the school system. Part of it is just the music education that I had. And there was no room for error or growth. Like, you had to be perfect. And I am in a place where, like, people don't expect perfection. They expect improvement. And it's such a, like, people in Nashville don't even remember they met you, more or less how well you played. Like, because there's so many people here. And so there were times where it's just like, I had to just let go of the perfection. And I had to start to assuming that any time I was playing in public, it was going to be recorded. And just letting that be its thing, being its own thing. But I really wanted something that was like, I had some control over what it sounded like, right? So going into the studio, I wanted to have something that I could give to people and be like, this is what I do. And of course, then I had to figure out what I did, right? It was like, what do I do? Who am I as an artist? Like, and so that took a little bit of time. And then I also wanted to have something that I could use to apply for grants, that I could try to go on tour, that I could use. And so that was sort of the intention of going into those recording sessions. And then when I realized I had an album, it was it was incredible. It was one of those things where I still sort of look at it. I have the album with me, and I'm like shocked. I'm like, it's like, I remember buying albums when I was a kid, and just like, now there's one with my name on it. It still makes me all giddy.
Yeah, it's amazing. What a huge accomplishment. And
yeah.
So, and now because you have the album and you're playing, like, you're a full-time professional musician. And you also created your podcast and your community, Brave Musician. Could you share, too, a little bit more about your goal behind the podcast and the community, and then what you'd love to accomplish with Brave Musician down the road, and also your music career down the road, too?
Yeah. So it's interesting because Brave Musician came up. We have the full story on the blog, and we've talked about it on our podcast, but the short version of it is that I graduated from my master's in 2015, and 2 days after I had graduated, my co-founder Marina called me up and asked if I had any content that we wanted to create something together. And it was just like this serendipitous moment. And so that was kind of how Brave Musician started, was literally just a phone call out of the blue. And I had just, for my master's project, I had written a 154-page book on doubling, essentially playing multiple instruments, which is what I was spending most of my time doing. So I was playing flute and clarinet and saxophone and doing a lot of musical theater and that sort of thing. And so as we talked more and more, and we talked to different people, we realized that people really didn't need another book on how to play musical instruments. What was missing in our world was people talking about how to be a human that makes music. And this is 2015. This is way before the movement of, being a person that we have now. I think we talk a lot more about mental health, and it's a lot of podcasts on, finding your way through things. But in 2015, there really wasn't anything. And so we started sort of thinking, okay, how are we going to do this? So originally, ironically now, it was going to be an education company. We were going to do workshops, and we did a few. And so we started the podcast in 2019, and with the intention of communicating and talking to each other, but also talking to other people. So I had a lot of guests on the podcast, which was really wonderful and helped me learn a lot. And I kept it going through the pandemic. The last episode that was aired in the middle of 2022. I think it was August of 2022. But in 2023, I kind of had to focus on the album. So I haven't had any new episodes in the last year. But it's coming back. And one of the things that there's two things I really love about podcasting in general. One of them is that it is long form. You can get into things, you can dig into ideas, you can ask questions. And the other thing that I love about it is that it's an opt-in format. People are actually choosing to listen to a podcast. It is not coming up on their feed. It is not random. It is not being forced upon them. Like, we listen to podcasts because we want to listen to the podcast. and so those two things, I love that. I love that format. I love the fact that it's, you can do a 10-minute podcast, you can do an hour and 10-minute podcast. And so one of the things that I want to do next, it's not that I've completely abandoned the education piece, but I think what I'd like to do is, in terms of workshops, is more provide a space where people can grow more organically. It's not me giving you knowledge over something, but more me facilitating you finding knowledge within yourself, and then maybe giving tools that have worked for me to do that. So that's where I see the education piece going. And I think the next part of the podcast journey is going to be talking about making these albums for me, because one of the things that I think prevented me from doing it was that I had no guidance. I had nobody really helping me, telling me it was even possible, how to do it, where are the ways to do it. And moving to Nashville, where literally there are hundreds of thousands of studios and, hundreds of musicians, it just enabled me to be able to pick and choose. And people were so helpful. Like, I got help from everyone within this process, who were like, this is how we do it, or this is how it's commonly done, or this is what I would do, or we love that idea. Never done it before, but let's try it. Whatever it happens to be, it was just such a supportive place. And I would really like to, especially for other women, is just offer one way in which it can be done, and give people some knowledge heading into it as to what they're getting themselves into.
Yeah, that's a great resource. And like you said, because you were just kind of in the dark as far as what to do, you could be able to provide that for somebody else who needs to know what to do. And you'll probably still learn more yourself as you go along that way. And so you have that community. And then as you're performing more now, how often are you playing, and like what types of places are you playing at? And then if anyone is in Nashville or the surrounding areas and they want to come see a show, plug a show. Your episode will probably be aired in like a few weeks. So if you have anything, coming up in February, plug those.
Nice. Yeah. So it was wild because, 2023, I want to make sure I've got my dates right. Yeah. So when I finished recording this, the last one was in December of 2022. We did the second recording. And so, yeah, all right, now I'm getting my dates right. The first session was April of 2022. The second session was December of 2022. So that was when I did the recordings themselves. So in February of 2022, I applied for a grant. And this was kind of the first time that I had done these sort of grant cycles. And so I ended up applying for 3 of them, and I ended up receiving 2. And so this was wild to me. So the first one was with Chamber Music America, and they have a Performance Plus grant, which is designed for women-led jazz ensembles. So it's a national grant. And what it does is it enables me to hire a coach. We get to have rehearsals, and then we get to record again. So somebody handed me money to record a second album, like 3 months after I had finished the first one. Yeah, it was insane. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh. So that happened. And then not about a month later, I received a Jazz Road grant through South Arts, and they pay to tour. Yeah.
Wow.
So it was it snowballed. 2003 just snowballed into this like wonderfulness of, I had recorded the second album in June, And the first album wasn't even released yet. It was being released in July along with the tour. It was just, I didn't even know which way was up. Like, I was trying to coordinate a tour. I was, this is the first time I'd been on tour, and I had I had a different bass player, but otherwise the same people in the band that did the record was also on the tour. And it was amazing. It was just one of the most amazing times that we had. And it was a great way to sort of introduce me into the world very unconventionally. Like, here, I felt like I just struggled and struggled and struggled for years and years. And then suddenly, in the course of just a couple of months, I've got 2 albums and 2 grants. Like, it was just wild. And so the tour ended in July, and then I moved in August. And so, like, the last half of this year has been kind of just like figuring out which way is up and figuring out what to do next. And like, so as far as gigs are concerned, I've been really lucky that I haven't had to take anything. Well, and then in September I played Alabama Women in Jazz Festival that ended up getting rained out. And so then we rescheduled it for December. And so it was just this like wonderful sequence of events throughout the year. But I didn't really get a chance to like cultivate any sort of regular gig schedule like here in Nashville. So that's kind of one of the things that I'm working on heading forward. My goal is I would love to go out across the country and travel and perform at least once a month. I don't want to be on the road 300 days a year, but at least once a month, maybe twice a month, go out and either bring my group on the road or work with local musicians in whatever city I'm in. And that is the thing that I would love to do. That's kind of what I'm working on building now.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I never knew, because I'm outside of the music world, I didn't know that grants were available for musicians specifically for recording purposes and for touring purposes. Because earlier you mentioned grant, and I guess I was still in like education mindset, so I was thinking, oh, it had something to do with education. I didn't put 2 and 2 together, and then you were just explaining that now. So I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, that's really a neat tool that, maybe a lot of musicians know, but for somebody who might want to, who's like, you who wants to start pursuing this dream or goal that they've had, and they may not even know that that's out there. So that's just, I love that that's a possibility for other people. Well, okay,
Absolutely.
So we talked about how you started your professional music career in your 40s. And kind of like how you mentioned earlier when there was the saxophonist who passed away at 41, and he had accomplished so much. And at the time you felt like, oh my gosh, what have I done? And a lot of people feel that same way too, that if they haven't accomplished anything by the time that they are 40, that they've wasted their life, they feel like there's a lack of a purpose. And so because of, that one moment that happened, and there's this dream and desire of yours, you chose to pursue this passion of yours regardless of your age. And now that you are kind of in it, you mentioned earlier you're mid-40s now. As you're in it currently, has age ever played a factor now as far as like while you're in it pursuing it, or is it more of like, hey, I'm doing what I love and I don't care how old I am?
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people don't believe me when I tell them how old I am, which is always really wild. And so, I mean, even to the point where they'll like argue, and I'll be like, yeah, I'm 46. They're like, no, you're not. And I'll be like, yes. And so I have 2 quick funny stories about age that just make me laugh. But I had one friend, and we were talking, who is pretty close. He's about a year away from me. So we're pretty much the same age. And at one point he was like, can I ask how old you are? And I sort of, kind of looked at him. He goes, you're in your 30s, right? And I was like, no. And then he goes, 20s? And I just burst out laughing. I'm like, you went backwards? I was like, no. But then this happened just a couple weeks ago. I was talking to somebody who was in their 20s, and I was telling them about making the first album when I was 45. And, he was just kind of talking about wanting to do his own album and wanting to work things out. And I said, you know, most of my colleagues who are my age, who are professionals doing what I do, I'm like, a lot of them recorded in their 20s. And I'm like, so I feel like it was really late, even though it wasn't. And he sort of looks at me like he doesn't quite believe me. And there's one of those people at the show that we're at. And so I called him over. And this is somebody who's famous out in the world, in the jazz world. And I said, hey, you know, when did you record your first album? And he goes, like, as a leader? And I said, yeah. He goes, oh, it was really late. I was 29.
Wow.
And I was like, but that's the messaging, that 29 is late. And so I think, and then that hasn't always been the case, because I've had other people who have told me, yeah, I made my first album at 40, right? And that has always been really encouraging when I hear other people talk about waiting, or they didn't figure out, or they had other life things that they had to do first. Like, a lot of that ends up being the situation. But I think now I'm so happy to be alive. Like, I know that sounds sort of cliche, but like, we all survived a pandemic. Like, that's a legitimate thing. And I am just so happy now because I have created a life for myself where I get to pursue being an art. And that includes playing the saxophone, that includes composing, that includes making visual art, that includes writing. I've started writing a book. And I just get to spend my time creating, collaborating with people, because as a musician, especially the music that I do, it's very collaborative. And so that's an amazing thing for me, to work with other people who I love and value. And I just look at my life sometimes and I'm like, this is so amazing. This is just like so amazing. And I've created this space, and a lot of it comes with privilege. And so I have to acknowledge that. But I don't have to keep track of a clock. I don't have to do things for a certain amount of time. I literally just get to follow whatever path I want on any given day. And I'm so grateful for that right now. It's like my little inner 6-year-old child is like so happy.
Yeah, it's awesome because, this 6-year-old child who always wanted this, and then you go through school and you said it was beaten out of you not to be able to perform or to pursue this, and then you teach and you didn't love it, and then you went through the pandemic and it was lonely and it was hard, and then you come out of it and you record this album, and now a second one, and you just said you're writing a book, and like you're doing these things that you wanted to do, and you're not letting your age or your season in life stop you. Like, you're chasing after it, and I love it. And I have one more question for you that I ask all my guests, and I can't wait to hear your answers. So if you could encourage one woman who does feel blocked or limited to pursue a dream or a goal based on her age or life circumstance, what would you tell her?
It's so funny because I've been thinking about this a lot, and there's a wonderful book called Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagowski. And I read the book twice during the pandemic because I was so burnt out that I didn't even know it. Like, I had used that term a lot, but I didn't understand it. But this book was amazing. And what she talks about, for especially women, so since I'm a woman, I'll speak from that perspective, of this idea that we're taught to be human givers, whereas men are typically taught to be human beings. And I think as we get older, and as I got older, it was more, just give more, just give more, just give more. And I think I just want to remind everybody that they are human beings. They are allowed to be. And so it is one of those things that if you have something in your life that you want, whether it's to write a book or to travel somewhere or to do something that somebody has said, you're not allowed to do that because you're too old, I would say, no, you are a human being. You get to go be whoever and do whatever you want to do, that brings joy to your life, that makes you feel like a whole person. And I think it's hard sometimes. Not everybody's going to get it. There are people that look at my life and they're like, what did she do? Should she lose it? Like, and to that I would say maybe yes, and happily.
Yeah.
Like, yes, I lost a bunch of things and am still like kind of sorting through all of that. But I want to just encourage people to know that it's never too late. It is never too late to do anything. And sometimes you have to let go of how good you think it's going to be. I think I spent a lot of time teaching adults privately. And the biggest challenge, like if you want to take up saxophone at 40 from the beginning, is that you already have taste. You already have this idea of what is good and what's bad. And that's the hardest thing to overcome. And so I think anytime you start something new, especially if it's something that you have wanted your whole entire life, you have to be okay with being kind of bad at it for a little while. Or maybe never reaching the pinnacle of success that somebody who did it 20 years longer than you will do. But it doesn't mean not to do it, you know?
Yeah, that's so good, Monica. I love that. That's just some great wisdom and words of encouragement too for other people. And I would, also want you to just share where people can find you and go to your website and find your music. So use that time now to share about yourself.
Okay. Well, I do have a website. It's monicashriver.com. So just my name all together. And there you can find links to my art right now is just on Instagram. So my Instagram is Saximony. And I picked it when I was 18. That was a long time ago. It's silly. It's funny. It like went through this like awkward stage and now it's back to being cute. But, play saxophone. So Saximony. And same thing on Facebook, Instagram, all of the things. And then there's links to Brave Musician and that podcast. And then you can stream my music anywhere that you listen to streaming. You can find it. Or on my website, monicashriver.com/acceptance, if you want to buy the physical album and get the bonus track and a nice little note from me thanking you for buying it.
Awesome. I'll put all of that in the show notes too, Monica. Thanks you so much for sharing part of your story and taking time today to join the More Than Your Age podcast. It's been a treat.
Thank you so much, Erica. I'm so happy that this exists, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. My pleasure.